Okay, let's get back into it. Now, in the previous episode, option 1, we hooked into the created eloquent event, and there we handled the sending of the mail. Definitely an option. Option 2, though, is to fire a traditional event. And I'll show you 2 ways to handle that. First, using a custom event, and second, using the created event that we already have through Eloquent, but one step at a time. If I run PHP Artisan, as you might expect, there is a make event command that we can use here. Okay, so I'm going to make an event, and again, like I noted in the last episode, an event represents a thing that took place in your system. So you want to name this as practically as you can, and usually in the past tense. So if you want to say, well, the event was, the project was published, maybe that's the terminology you use. Fine. Or if you want to say project published or project created, whatever you want. Generally, though, as a guideline, it takes the shape of the thing that took place and in past tense, since it has already happened at the time you fired the event. Okay, so if you run that command, you'll now find an app events directory, and here we go. And it can be a little overwhelming at first, but don't worry, a lot of this is related to server to client broadcasting that we're not going to review. So in fact, if I save this file, and it auto-formats, it'll remove a lot of classes that we aren't making use of. And in fact, we could even go one further, because again, we're not going to broadcast this. I can remove all of the Illuminate broadcasting imports and get rid of this like so. Now, if I scroll down, again, you'll see something related to broadcast. I'm going to remove that as well. Okay, so now you can see if you get rid of the broadcasting side, it ends up being a lot more simple. And in fact, honestly, if I had my vote, I think there should be a standard event class that's basically this, and then a broadcastable event class, even if it's only available through the artisan command that will add the additional scaffolding, because it can be a little overwhelming at first, I think, for a simple event class. Okay, anyways, a little bit of a tangent there. If we get back to it, this event represents a thing that took place. So it stands to reason that we need to know the project. We'll pass that in and import it. Bring that down. And we get something like this, and we'll make that public. Okay, so if I fire an event called project created through the constructor, I'm going to pass the associated project, the project in question that was created. Okay, so now, at any point in your system, in this case, we're going to do it here in the controller. A lot of people frown on that. They would want it in the model. You can decide for yourself here. I'm just going to show you a couple options. So after the project has been created, you can use this helpful event helper where you new up the class. So I could say project created, and I am going to import the event. Okay, and we'll give it the project. Okay, so this event function is used to make an announcement throughout your entire system. And now anywhere you can listen for that event, hook in, and then respond with any kind of side effect that you need. So here's what we'll do. I'm going to go to project/create, and then also open a new tab, and we'll visit Telescope, and I want to review the events that have been fired. So at the moment, there are none, but if we make a new project, there we go. Now if I switch back, you can see, yep, an event was fired called project created, and it contained this data. Now though, you'll notice we have a listeners tab here. Now if on one end of the spectrum you are firing an event, on the other end is where you listen for that event and respond to it. And at the moment, we have none. So let's work on that now. Once again, as you might expect, we have a helper to generate one. Make listener. Create a new event listener class. Now, for naming, of course, there's no rules that you have to follow. You can name these whatever you want. But again, what I might recommend to you is name it exactly what you're going to do in response. So if you are sending a project created a notification to the owner, then it's fine. Name it something as verbose as that. It's very clear. It does one thing, and it's fine. No issue there. So let's see what that might look like. We now have an events directory for a thing that took place in our system, and we have a listeners directory for things that respond to events that took place. Now though, if we scroll down, we're going to handle the event. However, let's do PHP Artisan help make listener. And you'll see, among other things, you can pass it event flag. So this is our way to tell the artisan command that generates all of that boilerplate. Here is the event that is associated with this listener. So let's give that one a shot. PHP Artisan, run it again, but I'm going to add the event, and what was it called? Project created. Okay, so let's run that. And now if I switch back, we'll get new boilerplate, but you can see it does pull in that class, and then it type hints it here. So think about it. We have a listener class called send project created notification. And if we scroll down, here is where we handle the project created event. It reads fairly well. So now we could refactor all of this. All of this could go away, and I can move it here. All right, I need to import that as well as the mailable. But notice they do have the same name. So what I'm going to do here is import that, and we'll say as project created mail. And then down here, I will update this. Okay, so now let's think about where we are. When a user creates a new project in the controller, after we run that query, we fire a custom event called project created. This event is basically, at its core, a container for an action that took place in your system. A project was created, and here's the project in question. Next, we've registered a listener that wants to handle when a project was created. In response, it wants to mail the owner of the project for that event. But notice we're expecting a project variable, but we only have event. So here's how it works. When this handle method is called, it will be given an instance of project created. So if I want to grab the project in question, I could just say event project. Okay, so let's update this. If we scroll down, I can say event project owner email and event project, and we're good to go. Now though, we have created an event and we've created a listener, but there isn't yet a one-to-one connection between those two. We haven't yet registered them with the system, with Laravel. So here's what we'll do. In my providers directory, you'll find an event service provider file. And if we scroll down, we can see here is where we register all event listener mappings for the application. And you can already see one here that you can use if you're using email verification. So again, notice that the event and listener end up being very readable. This event is called registered, and the listener is called send email verification notification. Very simple. So in our case, the event is project created. I'm going to import that. And the listener will be send project created notification. And we'll import that one. So you can see for any event, you can have any number of listeners that respond to the event. So this ends up being a slightly more complex way to get started, but it ends up ultimately decoupling a lot of your code. If for any given action you have 10 different things that need to take place, 10 different side effects, well, you fire an event one time, and then you register 10 different event listener classes that respond to it in some way. So here's how it's going to play out. I'm going to go through this because I know it can be a little confusing at first. Once you understand eventing, it makes perfect sense. But if you're not quite there, it's a little blurry, it feels abstract, and there's something to talk about there. We'll get to that at the end of the video. Anyways, you go to that form and you create a new project, and you hit this method. You then validate the project, you persist it, and then we fire this custom event. Hey, a project was created. Here's the project in question. Anywhere in our system, do what you want. Okay, well, if we go back into our event service provider, we specifically said, if this event, project created, is ever fired, here is what I want to do. I want to send a project created notification. This class will then be resolved out of the container, and a handle method will be called while passing through the event that took place. So in our case, we're doing one thing, and that one thing is to email the owner of the project. Let's see if it works. We'll go back to our project. We'll create a new one, my next project. We'll create it, it persists it, and it should fire off an email, this time not directly in the controller and not as a eloquent event hook, but as a custom event listener. So if I go to my mail tab, you can see just now we did fire that. And there we go. Here's what it looks like. Or, once again, we can go into the Events tab. Here is the event that we just fired, and then here is the listener that we have registered for it. Okay, so now let's do a review. I want you to think about whether or not you like this approach. And I think If this is your first foray into eventing, your first thought is, hell no, way too difficult. We created so many different classes when all we had to do was just use that mail class directly here and we were good to go. And I would say you might be on the right track. As much as you possibly can, I'd recommend always go for the simplest option. Do not try to plan for some kind of architecture that you read in a book. Do not plan for growth that your application may never encounter. Really try to push against complexity as much as you can. But nonetheless, there's just going to be situations where something takes place and you need to do 12 different other things, and the idea of doing it all in this controller method sounds horrible. And the idea of creating a dumb service class where you're basically just copy and pasting this code into the service class, that's horrible as well. So at those points, you do need to consider other options. And I think that's especially where firing an event makes good sense. So that means we've reviewed 3 options for how to send that email. 1, do it directly in the controller. 2, do it in the model and register a event hook. And 3, use a custom event. But now let's just top this off with, we'll call this event B. Yes, you could fire a custom event, but don't forget, Eloquent already fires its own event when a project is created. So take a look at this. I'm going to go to Project. I'm going to create a property here called Dispatches Events. And here's where we can create a mapping between a Eloquent model event and the event class that you want it to correspond to. So for example, I could say that created Eloquent event should map to project created. Like so. So here's what this translates to. When Eloquent fires the created event, or in other words, when you create a new project and it gets persisted to the database, Eloquent is now going to trigger this project created event automatically for you, which means over here, you no longer have to fire it manually. It's going to be done through the project created event. Now, just like before, just register your listener and then wire it up within your event service provider, as we have done here, and you're good to go. So let's make sure that one works as well, and then I think we'll call it a day. And we can talk more in the comments about what you think of these 3 approaches. Final example, create the project. There we go. And once again, if I go into the events directory, just now we did fire that event, which means we should have a mail that was sent out just now as well. The final example is complete. Okay, so let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you like this approach? When do you think it's necessary? When do you think it's not? It's important to figure out where you stand on things like this, because it will determine how you approach every facet of your application.